Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This first dive from Tom Daley and his partner Noah Williams will be an inward 1.5 somersault in the pike position. Noah Williams and Tom Daley are the Olympic silver medalists. The gold has gone to China, the bronze has gone to Canada, but Tom Daley is back on an Olympic podium.
Here we are then, with Great Britain's first medalists of Paris 2024. Scarlett and Yasmin, what do you reckon?
Nuts. Couldn't be happier. I think both of us, I'm still in shock.
Yeah, we got a PB today, which we're really pleased about.
1 gold, 4 silvers in swimming, 1 silver and 4 bronzes in diving, and an historic medal in artistic swimming too. Then came the medal rush, 32 in total, including 18 gold, 8 silver and 6 bronzes. At the Olympics and Paralympics, it was a Paris 2024 to remember in the pool. I'm John.
And I'm Michael, and not a bad few weeks then for the man in charge. And whilst I'm pretty sure in the next 20 minutes or so, he's going to credit the team behind the team, mention the support staff and the athletes themselves. In this episode, we want to find out how a humble news reporter becomes a CEO of one of sport's leading national governing bodies. This is Great British Bosses from Anything But Footy. And John, there may even be a few pointers in this one for us.
And I'm Drew Barrand, the Chief Executive of Aquatics GB.
Drew, I kind of summed it up pretty well. The numbers speak for themselves. What a summer.
Yeah, it's almost unbelievable in many ways. You sort of look back and go, wow, did that all really happen the way that it happened? I think what was quite amazing was the variety of opportunities and podiums that we delivered across the sports. I think that's definitely a first in terms of the medals being more equally spread across the different aquatic disciplines. And I think this just shows out the mentality of the team is that, you know, in some areas we're coming back disappointed, even though we've delivered our best medal tally. Certainly, you know, from an Olympic perspective, we equaled the medal tally from Tokyo, which is our best ever. And obviously from a Paralympics perspective, that was the best gold medal rush that we've had in over a century, I believe. So, yeah, I mean, we came back with great results, things that the team were really proud of. But yeah, there was certain elements of could have been even better. And I really like that mentality because it shows that we're not satisfied. We want to move forward, you know, and we want to keep improving both the output and the performances.
And the success in both the Olympics and Paralympics shows that it was right to rebrand earlier this year.
Yeah, I think that was really true. I mean, we spoke about this a lot at the time when we obviously revealed it back in, God, that feels like an age away now, back in March, you know, pre-champs and then obviously pre-games. But yeah, the rationale was initially a practical one. We weren't just swimming, and we wanted certainly an organisation that where everybody felt connected to it. But simply when the performances then across the board deliver in such a variety of different ways, then yes, absolutely, it sends credence to that point, which is, you know, we're aquatic sport. There are lots of sports within an overarching sport, and I think our ability to be able to connect all those things together and grow the whole thing is massive. And I really like the variety that our sport offers, whether it's at the participation end or obviously at the performance end. You know, all of those performances in Paris, right across the 2 games, they're very different. You know, and lots of different sort of backgrounds to when they came on into the competition, and then obviously what they achieved afterwards. And it's the personalities and the stories that come out at you. It doesn't feel like it's the same victory every time. It's almost like it's lots of different mini victories, you know, and lots of different ways in which we can look at it. So overall, yeah, absolutely pays credit to the opportunity that exists within our sport, which is sizable, as we all know. But, you know, we're not even done yet.
Drew, did you have a highlight? And maybe I'll let you have an Olympic highlight and a Paralympic highlight. I know you're the boss. I know it's not about individuals, but, you know, what was the one bit at the Olympics, the one bit at the Paralympics you went home and thought, wow?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, it's really difficult to pinpoint one. And I think you're right. It's very difficult to compare an Olympic Games with Paralympic Games because they're very different in terms of their way. But, you know, I think it's difficult even at the end of what had been a pretty long couple of weeks, the Kate and Izzy moment for artistic swimming, for that to be the first ever medal that we've ever produced. and for them to do so unbelievably well that they nearly snatched gold. And they've done that off a pretty kind of bare bones funding pot, if we're honest with each other. So that felt special. That felt like a real moment. But then, and even going back to the, obviously the diving program was fantastic. That 4-4 streak in the first week where it just kept getting better and better. And you don't normally want to kind of, make light of other people's misery, but that mistake from the Australians of produced the very first medal for us in terms of that bronze for Yaz and Scarlett. You're sort of sitting there and going, that could have easily gone the other way. But it went in our favour, and then it built momentum. And then off the back of that, it's only that first week with the synchro events, we almost felt unbeatable. So that was a kind of pivotal moment, even though it wasn't anything really to do with our divers. It was just, that moment, the pressure that they created on the scoreboard that then led to the mistake. Just shows how mature our divers have got. So that really impressed me in terms of, they're not giving up. They kept putting it out there, and certainly that last dive, they put the pressure on and created the mistake, which was fantastic. And then in the swimming, it's almost like some of the tougher moments of that first week in the swimming when I'm watching Max Litchfield having just missed out on a bronze medal for the third games in a row by so minimal a margin, and he's just absolutely broken, and he gave it his all, British record, and it's just fractionally not enough, and you kind of like your heart kind of goes out to him on that perspective. But then you go from that to the high of obviously the 4x2 boys just doing it again, and that being the first ever time that the same athletes had gone back to back with Olympic titles was something incredible. So lots of highlights. Not all of them were the kind of primary medal moments that you remember. Like I said, some of the things where you really sort of feel for the individual because you know them, both on the highs and the lows. But that's the Olympics, and then obviously then you go into the Paris, and it was almost like we could do no wrong. Like literally every day it was kind of like, is this getting any better? This is obscene. And I think the overarching bit there was the conversion rate to gold was insane, like nothing we've ever seen. But again, there's stories within stories. You look at back and look at Tully Kearney and what happened to her in Tokyo, and then to come back and then get what she deserved out of the sport was a fantastic moment. Then you've got what was really impressive was the younger ones coming through, for whom this was, for most of them, in all honesty, the first Paralympic Games in front of crowds. So if you'd have to go back three games for that to be a sort of comparable, if you like. And the way that they dealt with it was insane. You got Poppy Maskell winning multiple golds, Maisie defending titles. It was all over the place. So it's really difficult to pick one moment. But I think for me, it's kind of the overarching thing of what happens behind the scenes, and the camaraderie, and the fact that they, for both the swimming, the diving, the para swimming, and obviously the artistic, it was the fact that they lived each other's highs and lows. And it was very much a team effort. It was never about the individual. It was about, when we were winning stuff, it was great. When we were narrowly missing out, then everybody felt the pain. And I think that goes to a lot of the kind of culture and teamwork that the coaches and the performance team have built behind the scenes, which is fantastic for our sport, and long may it continue, because that is it. We're an aquatics team, and the results of a team are more important than the individual successes. And and I think that emphasis really came out. So that's the bit that I remember in amongst all of the highs and the lows and the medal moments and the slight near misses, was that sense of teamwork that came out, and that everybody was so supportive of each other and really pushing each other on to perform on the day, which is what we spend a lot of time talking about and trying to get them into that headspace to do. So it wasn't easy. There was a lot of things thrown at them. So yeah, I think that's the bit I remember rather than one moment. It's just how well the team and the total team, everybody involved, not just the athletes, how well they cope with the moment, because it's such a big jump up.
John was there for that first diving medal, that momentum moment, as you say, for Scarlett and Yasmin, and I know that was certainly a highlight for him. I've been banging the drum about artistic swimming on this podcast for a long, long time. And so I think Kate and Izzy's medal was fantastic. But for me, Jack Law winning another medal, and Lois Tolson as well, because those are people that, being North Yorkshire based, I've known for quite some time, and I've followed Lois since she was, so young. And to see her finally get that Olympic medal was huge. How are you feeling about the fact that in LA it's going to be different? You're going to be going second on the program.
Yeah, we're going second for the first time. I'm not sure how much difference it makes. I think we'll probably come on to this it's no doubt that whilst the Paris Games was an absolute spectacle from a spectator perspective and from a TV perspective, there were issues behind the scenes. It wasn't all plain sailing in terms of that bit. And I think, with my mind still on that as we go through debriefs and all the things that we had to deal with, which quite frankly we shouldn't have had to deal with, you look ahead to LA and go, there is a benefit to going second. Because normally, when I say second, in terms of a second week compared to the switch with athletics, which obviously happening, is that a lot of the issues from an infrastructure perspective tend to be ironed out by the time you get to the second week. Whereas a lot of times swimming, it tends to end up being specifically the guinea pig in a lot of the things which, until you get into the run of the games, it takes them a few days to iron out some of those issues, particularly when you think about things like transport. So I think there's a logistical benefit to going second from that perspective. But I think for the athletes, there'll be a bit of a difference. Obviously they'll arrive into games with it up and running rather than being first ones off the block. But I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference, if I'm honest, in terms of the scheduling, because you plan for it. So we know it's happening. It's not like it's a late switch or anything. So, but yeah, I think it will be a refreshing change, I think, for some of them, certainly in terms of things like opening ceremonies and stuff, which they've always never been able to do because they were in the pool the next morning. So I think there'll be some peripheral benefits like that. But the biggest thing for me is probably that the infrastructure challenges that seem to blight every single games tend to get resolved by the time you hit the second week, which will be helpful.
And on that, Drew, is it a case we see the Olympics kind of start 2 or 3 days in advance? We saw it at the Stade de France this year, where you had the rugby sevens, and they kind of iron out the problems before the competition. Is it getting too big a games in effect to just start, as you said, day one, and everything's expected to work? Should there be some kind of warm up? Could they do something in the week in advance?
Well, I think they've obviously tried across the board with things like test events. And that's obviously been in the schedules for numerous games times now. I think if you think about the size of the scale up that they're trying to deliver, it's natural there's going to be teething problems. And I think largely speaking, those teething problems have predominantly, certainly over the last 3 to 4 games, been kind of kept to a minimum, in that you have a bit of infrastructure issues first couple of days, but by the time you get to day 3, it's kind of ironed out. It was a bit disappointing that Paris wasn't like that. But some of those infrastructure problems behind the scenes were still going on by the end of the first week. So I think, it's clear that there are budget challenges with delivering the games, whether it be the Olympics, Paralympics, and it's clear that, there is a pressure for the money to be spent on the show. And sometimes that, you could argue that sometimes that has happened at the downside of the athletes getting the facilities that they need, and that very much felt the case this time around. In the money that they got from a budget perspective was spent on making a spectacle, which was fantastic, don't get me wrong, and it was an unbelievable window for all of our sports. But some of the behind the scenes stuff wasn't working as smoothly as possible, and there were clear corners that had been cut. And I think you do get into that point.
Drew, on that, I think you've talked about this previously, about how, and other CEOs have talked to us about this as well, about when the Olympics and the Paralympics come together, you kind of hand your team over to a totally different team.
Yeah.
And the athletes have to adapt to that, and they're trying to deliver their greatest performance. So what you're saying is, effectively, the Paris organisers weren't good enough, and then you have the whole new way of being welcomed into Team GB as well. And Team GB do a good job, of course, but it is still different from week in, week out when they're swimming with Aquatics GB.
It is different. It is different to a degree. I mean, we're very lucky in that we pretty much everybody that is connected to the athletes day to day in terms of a team pretty much gets seconded over onto Team GB. So we try and keep it as consistent as possible. I think actually there are broader challenges with this, from a commercial perspective or from a profile perspective, in that there's nothing wrong with the Team GB brand. It's fantastic and has delivered a lot of profile, a lot of revenue into the sports. But the NGBs can get slightly pushed to one side on that perspective, and it's difficult to find your voice, when everything is done through the funnel of the multi-sports Team GB brand, and the same with Paralympics GB. So I think there are ways in which we can be more collaborative, which is not to devalue what has been created in those two things, because they are fantastic, but to try and make sure there's a longer tail for it that actually benefits the sports outside of the Olympic and Paralympic window. And I think it is a bit of a catch-22 with that whole approach, in that we talk so much about Olympic and Paralympic sport. And the problem with referencing it like that is that you're basically saying straight out the gate that you're only relevant once every 4 years. as opposed to them just being sports. But the other side of the coin is that is the climactic moment. And you ask any of the athletes, what's the one thing that they want to perform well at, and it's obviously the Olympic Paralympic Games. So we don't want to downplay that moment, because it is the pinnacle of certainly our sport and many others. But also we have to make sure that it's not the only moment that matters. And I think that for me is the trick in like all of the success that we had obviously during the summer. It can't just fall off a cliff, which is what historically has happened. We've got to keep it going. We've got to make sure that people understand that we've got a massive World Championships next summer in Singapore, and that we're building towards that. But we have a major event in the Aquatics GB Championships in April, where we select the team for that World Championship. So, we have to get people to understand that they can follow the sport, and it doesn't just all have to be seen through the multi-sport Olympic and Paralympic lens. And that's really, really important. And I think there's a lot of work to do in that area, because as big as the games are and as fantastic as they are as a spectacle and from an audience perspective, we do kind of fall off a cliff. And it's been the case for many a decade, and we have to resolve it, because it just doesn't work.
Drew, I think you're the man to take that on. And the reason I say that, I know I'm on a podcast from Anything But Footy, but I was a football commentator for a long time, and iFollow was a platform that I commentated on. And I know iFollow was something that you brought to the EFL, and I can't imagine how you created that platform with all those different stakeholders. I think I read something like 300 stakeholders to bring that broadcast platform to the English Football League and all the clubs. So what is the iFollow? What is the platform that we can create together then for the 37 NGBs that deliver Olympic and Paralympic sport all year round throughout the cycle?
I can't possibly sit here and take credit for the whole iFollow piece. There was a lot of working parts of that. It's very kind of you. But, I think fundamentally the bits that other sport has, which certainly our sport struggles a little bit, is the concept of a season. In that, because everything's been put into this kind of, everything has to peak around the Olympic Games, and we talk about 4-year cycles and et cetera, et cetera. Everything else feels like it's just isolated meets, but helping to prepare for that. You don't have that annual thing that rugby, cricket, football, tennis, golf has, which is season starts here, it ends however many months later, and somebody lifts the trophy. But there is a build, there's a season narrative. And I think certainly aquatic sports suffers from that, is that it feels like there's a lot of isolated swim meets, as an example, that are not connected in any way. And I think some of that is working in terms of the resolution. The solution to that is we have to work closer with our international colleagues to try and build that season, but also domestically. That's much more in our control. How can we create a series of connected events that build and that enable a fan to follow the sport? And I think some of that can involve multi-sport opportunities, and certainly we're very collaborative with other sports and are looking at venues. But the hard bit about the idea of multi-sports is just the complete differences in the schedules of the calendars. I mean, we even have it in our sport, is that, it's really hard to look at things from a swimming and a diving perspective, as an example, because the calendars are so different. I mean, like, I think the Olympics is the one time every sort of 4 years where they both peak at the same time. Like, a lot of the sort of swim meets are not on at the same time as the diving meets. So when you try to sort of tackle that, it's difficult. But I think everybody within our world, within our NGB world, has to focus on sorting their own house out as much as they humanly can, because that's the bit you can control. And then hopefully that then builds and creates opportunity to collaborate better on the international front, or indeed with other sports. But, I think we've all sat here and gone, how do we create, the kind of the viewing experience for multi-sports? And it's a big lift. And I think actually the sports have got a job to do to create that kind of opportunity for the audience to just on their own sport. Let's get that bit sorted first. And then obviously we can apply things on top in terms of collaborative efforts with either our international colleagues or other sports. But, for me, I'm a firm believer in control the controllables. And the thing that we absolutely have full control about is the domestic calendar of events in this country for aquatic sport. And we're doing a huge amount of work at the moment, looking at different opportunities and different models as to how we actually create that moment where there is more sustained opportunity for people to follow the sport. And I think as a final point, this is not to downplay participation. I think we've had this conversation before, that, we've never really talked about this sport as a spectator experience. But then when you go to the Olympic Games or the Paralympic Games, it proves that it is. Because one of the amazing things about Paris was that venue was full every single session for both games, and what an atmosphere it created. And you can't tell me all of those are getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and going swimming every day. It's the reality of the situation is that people want to watch it because it's top quality sport. And if you package it up in a way that's entertaining and appeals to that, then you've got a real fan base that you can build. And yes, there's obviously an overlap in terms of the element of those fan bases which are participation led, but we never talk about this sport as a spectacle. We need to, because I've seen it now at our own British Championships, and obviously we did a huge amount of work to try and make that more spectator friendly. You look at the TV viewing figures that we had off that, you look at the sellout crowds that we had of that, the way they interacted with the athletes. It's clearly possible. We just got to do it on a more consistent basis. And that's where the idea of a domestic season that a fan could actually follow, rather than, I think previously we've just looked at isolated meets that work at certain moments within the performance training cycle, but are essentially closed door training meets, because that's what they've been utilized for. Now it is possible to, create better sort of head-to-head racing and competition opportunities across all of our sports on a more consistent basis. And that's what we've got to move towards, so that we don't end up in this world whereby we've got one moment every 4 years and that's it.
I hear what you're saying, obviously, about getting your own house in order, but when we've interviewed the likes of yourself and Jack Buckner and John Dutton at Cycling, you've all said to us that we work in silos a little bit too much in our world. So would you agree that actually the collective of you guys getting together is greater than the sum of the parts, if you like?
Yeah, I think to a degree it is. I think the danger that you have with collaboration is that you end up creating a mini Olympics and it looks just like that. It looks like a poor man's Olympics, as opposed to being something fresh and different. And like I said, the challenges of pulling the schedules together as such. I'm absolutely a firm believer in collaboration across the kind of sporting systems. And if you look behind the scenes within performance, as an example, that happens a lot. They're always learning from each other and helping each other to get better, and that's as it should be. And the same, it should be true for us from a more kind of commercialized perspective. But I think the way to do that is to make the individual sports as strong as they can possibly be to start with, without trying to recreate the magic of an Olympic Games, because you will never do it. It's a one-off, unique environment. You'll try, and you will always be compared against that. Whereas I think if you've got a really strong community and a strong audience of aquatic fans, and then you can merge that with a strong audience of cycling fans and a strong audience of athletics fans, then you've got something. But I don't believe right now, and not being unfair against the other sports or our own sport, I don't think we're in a state where we've got those strong audiences really nailed down to enable us to transition into that multi-sport environment with good effect. I think it's difficult to recreate the Olympics, would be my view. But again, like I said, it's not against collaboration, because there's lots of areas where we do want to collaborate and do want to look at different models. But yeah, I think, again, you've got to get your own house in order first. And I think we don't do enough to be. Commerciality is basically about audience. It's how much of the audience can you deliver, which then enables commercial opportunity. And I think we're not audience focused enough as a sport, and haven't been historically. But that's the thing we're trying to change.
This is Great British Bosses from Anything But Footy. We're talking to Drew Barrand, CEO of Aquatics GB. I remember working with British Athletics a lot when they could bring Usain Bolt to come and perform at an event in this country. And that, obviously, he was the worldwide star and he came in. I think during Paris, there was a certain swimmer called Marchand who everybody knew who he was. Now, whether he could do that when the pool's slightly deeper, I don't know. That's a different matter. You'll have to ask the coach about that. That was I got told that the whole point was they made it more shallow so the French could potentially win a medal. However, I've never known like Michael Phelps to come and swim in this country, or Marchand to come and swim in this country. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about when you yes, you want your domestic meets, but you can kind of try and bring people into it?
Yeah, I think, listen, you want to use all of the assets that are available. And for the record, I think Marchand could have swam in a paddling pool and still beaten everybody, to be honest with you. He's that good. But yeah, I think, yes, absolutely, you're leaning to your assets as a sport. But also as well, you shouldn't ever pin everything on one or two athletes, because you have to be there for a longevity period. People have to enjoy the spectacle. And yes, it will always produce a Marchand, a PT, a Tom Daley. We'll always produce those kind of global names. You know, and obviously you want to get as much access to them as possible to help drive in more eyeballs. But fundamentally, you're wanting people to fall in love with watching the sport, and the athletes will come and go. And you know, you want it still to be as popular, you know, after PT and Marshall and everybody else retired as it was, you know, when they were around. So there is a danger in pinning it on specific athletes. It's more about getting the proposition right, and then that allows the athletes to shine. And what you will then do is shine a bit more of a spotlight on a broader range of athletes, because that's one of my big bugbears is that, you know, we've got across our world-class program, we've got, you know, north of 120, 130 athletes who are part of our program, many of whom are incredibly successful, and yet they don't have the profile. And the part of the reason has to be we have to look at ourselves and go, we've not promoted the sport properly enough to give them the platform to do that. You know, and I sit there and go, we're very lucky in that we've got, you know, some transition going on across all of our squads in terms of some new and younger names coming through, which is fantastic, because you can't be relying on the same old medalists every single time. That's particularly prevalent in paraswimming. But you know, we have to have an opportunity where we can tell their stories and put those personalities first. So I think it's more about the platform you create and how it enables you to tell stories that will bring people in and keep people, rather than pinning everything on specific athletes. Because the problem was, let's say, for example, we brought Marshall into an event here, we'd promote it as, hey, Marshall in Britain, etc., etc. And then everybody's going to go in with that being the KPI of why you want to go. Now, you know, hopefully you would create that environment and then they have a great time and want to come back. But if you're promoting it through the lens of single athletes, you do create a rod for your own back, because then when you don't have access to them, people switch off. So you have to promote the sport, the enjoyment of the sport, the spectacle of the sport, and then also have within that, obviously, the platform for individual names to shine, whether that be up and comers or obviously established stars.
And to be fair, you're absolutely spot on, because of course athletics is struggling somewhat to recreate the Usain Bolt moment, and that is a debate that we've had previously. Michael mentioned some of your background, Drew. Of course, you were marketing. I think you were at Pitch International with your marketing hat on, and you talk about propositions. Is Glasgow 2026 Commonwealth Games scaled back? We know swimming will be in it, but is it scaled back as a proposition? Is it good enough?
Difficult for me to totally comment, because a lot of the plans for what the format of the event looked like have not been released or shared. So I haven't probably seen as much as you guys have seen, in all honesty. So it's difficult to comment on what that looks like. I think that property was very much at a crossroads, in that it was a big lift for someone to host it. And as we all know, finding host venues for sporting events these days is very hard, particularly people who are willing to put up the money and invest and not necessarily have too much of a focus on the return. It has to be value for money now. So that bit has obviously created pressure more broadly across the industry, but also the Commonwealth Games as a property had kind of, you know, lost a bit of luster over the years and been dwarfed by other things that are going on. And it's a competitive market, not just against other sports events, but also attention for people's time. You know, like our big probably challenges are things like gaming and Netflix and you know, those kind of things, rather than, you know, these specific sports. And there were always going to be people who suffered in that environment, because, you know, the way that we were trying to sustain God knows how many sports, certainly in this country, in terms of interest, was never going to work. And it almost becomes survival of the fittest. So it's difficult for me to comment on the validity of that. I think they've reacted to the pressures of the moment and tried to create change, and they should be applauded for that, because it could easily have been hold your hands in the air and give up. And I think there is still value in that property, and certainly if you speak to the athletes, they want to participate, and they want it, they like it as an event. But it's got to be sustainable. You know, there has to be a way where that can be repeated again in 4 years' time, as per that cycle of that event. So, you know, it's not enough for me to just save it for 26. It's like, what's happening in 2030? What's happening in 2034? How is it going to move forward? How is it going to reposition itself to be more relevant and appealing in a very sort of cluttered market in terms of different sports events? So I think the jury's out. I think they've got a tough job, but it's not impossible. And I think it just requires a bit of different thinking. And I think the same would be true for all of us. You know, it's a struggle right now to try and get people to engage with the things that they traditionally engage with 10, 15, 20 years ago. You have to think differently. You have to present it in a very different way. And you have to understand what's going to tick people's boxes, because it's not the same experience as it was before. And the ones that are successful are the ones that are willing to change and willing to open themselves up to, perhaps offending some of the more traditionalists. Because, if you're going to survive and you're going to be able to bridge the gap between two Olympics in our world, and create sustainable businesses, then you have to offer something that people want. And what people want has changed a lot.
Just before we wrap up and John finishes with a couple of hard-hitting questions like how many widths do you do every morning, or can you do a 3.5 somersault in the pike position? I just want to ask you about a couple of your athletes who actually have prioritised and taken part in Commonwealth Games in the past, Tom Daley and Adam Peaty. Firstly, Tom, I'm not convinced that he won't come back for LA. I mean, it's his home city, but he said he's retired from competitive diving. So firstly, just your thoughts on what Tom has been and whether you think Adam Peaty has the heart and the head to carry on.
I think with Tom, listen, it's been said many, many times what a fantastic ambassador he's been to diving, and how helpful he's been in terms of inspiring a whole generation. And we're starting to see the results of some of those athletes that have come through the system. So, diving when he started was a very, very small sport. It's now regularly in the top 3 in terms of most viewed sports in Olympic Games. So, there's an audience there, and a lot of that is down to him and his charisma and his personality and all the rest of it. Do I think he's done? I think we have to take his word for it about the moment. So, yes, he said he's retired, and he's retired. But, I think we're all probably long enough in the tooth to realise that, it's never over till it's over. And as you say, there are a lot of reasons why LA might be appealing, but he doesn't need to make those sort of decisions now. So I think for now he's very clearly set his stall out and gone, that's it, done. And we'll see what time will bring. But yeah, he wouldn't be the first sports star to unretire, shall we say. So yeah, I have no expectations, but I fully expect the story to run a run. As respect to Adam, listen, I think he's come on record and said that he's still interested in LA. I think it kind of depends on some of the scheduling issues. It's hard, to be at that top level, certainly in I think in his own words, he's a great sprinter. 100 meters is tough. So, if 50 meters was going to come in, who knows? But again, the great thing about these kind of things is there's no pressure to make a decision right now. He doesn't have to, nor should he. He needs to see how his body's feel. A lot of things can change. But one thing I am absolutely clear on is that, it's a hell of a commitment to keep going at the very, very top of the sport, regardless of what sport it is. It takes determination and mindset. And some of these guys deserve a break. But what that does is create opportunity for others. And I think that's what really infuses me is that, I look through our kind of sports and it's not just the Adam Peaty and Tom Daley show. We've got lots of different names competing, bringing lots of different personalities to the fore, and being successful. And long may that continue, because I think that's the opportunity, is the breadth of the sport and the variety of different people. You don't look at football and say it's about one person. You don't look at rugby and say it's about one person. We've got to get away from this mentality. It's about the sport and how enjoyable it is and what great personalities it creates, not, our success entirely being hinged on whether Adam or Tom decide to go again. If they do, fantastic, and we'll welcome them with open arms because they're fantastic ambassadors for our sport. But that's not what is in my head.
You do have a new man in charge. Quick word about what Stephen Tigg, who's replaced Bill Furness as head coach, will bring to the organisation.
I think he's an incredibly successful, proven coach. I mean, obviously Duncan being his sort of flagship athlete, if you like, but even around other things, you look at the way Anne Harrod Evans performed in Paris. She's one of Stephen's cohort. He's incredibly well respected. I think it's really nice for us to be able to give the best person the job and that person come from within. It feels like there is a succession plan that has been created over many years, and that's down to the way that Chris Spice and his performance team operate their environments and are always thinking about the next thing. So I think there was an element of it felt natural that he was the best man for the job. And obviously we wish him all the best of luck, but I'm really happy he's bringing some great new ideas to things. Bill's been an incredible servant to the sport, but the time was right for him to take a step back and have some long overdue family time. And yeah, I think we're really confident, and being able to manage that transition so quickly and cleanly is testament to the entire team and the environment they've created, because it feels seamless. It feels like it's the right thing to do. It feels like everybody is supportive of that direction of travel, and that we did it at the right time and with the right messaging from both sides, in terms of both Bill's departure and obviously Stephen coming on board in that bigger role. So yeah, I think it's incredibly exciting time for us, and yeah, he will bring an awful lot of new thinking that will help take us forward and hopefully deliver success in future years.
So, final couple of questions. Watch this space seems to be the message, Drew, about Aquatics GB. You mentioned about the World Championships last year. LA is a long time away. I know it's not in the big scheme of things, but we don't want to be talking about LA. We want to be talking about what's happening now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously we did a number of different things in the sort of 12 months or so that I've been in post. The most obvious things being things like rebrands and, slightly reframing the event strategy and putting a lot more focus into fan engagement. I think those themes will continue. We're looking at additional new initiatives that we hope to bring to the table over the coming months. But the focus will always be, how do we grow our sport? How do we grow the capability of our athletes? How do we grow the sport in terms of eyeballs and interest and revenue and all the things that matter in terms of making us a profitable and sustainable business? So I think you're going to see more new stuff from us. I think we're not by any stretch of the imagination done yet. It wasn't the new things that we brought in this year. We've got to continue to grow that. I want British Championships to be even bigger next year. We want that consistency of broadcasting presence and media profile. We want obviously great athletes and great opportunities. So we're looking at lots of different and new things that we can do. And I think that's the thing. You've got to keep moving forward, keep evolving, keep doing different stuff. Because if you for 1 minute sit on your hands and go, we're done, that's the slippery slope, and that exists both on the performance side, but as well, obviously, in terms of the way that we promote the sport. So, yeah, it definitely is watch this space. We'd certainly be bringing more and more new things at people, because one thing is absolutely clear to me: there are 16 million people in the UK who would profess themselves to be fans of aquatic sports. How do we connect to them? How do we unlock that potential that they have to follow their sport, which feels like it comes alive in an Olympic and Paralympic summer and then disappears under a rock for the rest of the time? We've got to bring that out more consistently and quite frankly give people the opportunity to watch the sport they love, because there's no doubt in my mind at all there's a sizable audience for the sport in this country, and we've got to unlock it. And if you do that, lots of good things will happen. And you're enjoying it? Yeah, I mean, I'm probably slightly grayer or whiter than I was 12 months ago. No, I am enjoying it, and I think that's the big thing is there is so much potential in this sport, and I've worked in lots of different sporting environments over the course of my career, but this sport is full of people who want it to succeed. I think it's crying out for people to come with ideas and for everybody to get behind. Yeah, you have to have the stringent debate. Is this the right thing to do? And clearly we want to make sure that all the stakeholders that are involved in any decision making have full input. But it does feel like a supportive environment. And I think we've got the bit that's always difficult to sort of create or replicate is success. And we've certainly had that in terms of our athletes in the pool. And they're doing their job, and it's down to us to do our job and, basically create a better and more sustainable structure for the sport moving forward, that has regular touch points for people to engage with it. So yeah, it's short. I am enjoying it, but there's a lot of work to do, and we're only just started would be the message. But I think anybody who has been involved in our sport at any point in time during their lifetime will understand how passionate people are about it, and what a big audience it has. It's just about unlocking it. So that's got to be the trick for me. So yeah, I'm really enjoying working with the people that I get to work with every day. I'm really enjoying the passion that people have for the sport. But I want to do things differently, because I think we have to, if we're going to move forward and really create the kind of profile this sport deserves. Which for me is we're a long way off that yet, and we've got a lot of work to do. But obviously, thanks to people like yourselves who continue to talk about it, this is all good stuff. So it's exciting, right? Yeah.
Well, fascinating conversation. We've probably gone on a bit longer than we ordinarily would, but we had so many questions and so many we've still got for you, Drew. And this podcast is about you. It's not about us. But I would say to you that I'm proud that when you talk about that storytelling piece, that on our podcast, on Anything But Footy, we have done that storytelling. with those athletes that you talk about are not just the big name athletes, but, you know, we followed Kate and Izzy from day dot, for example. I certainly have. I mean, I've been pushing John along that way, and I'm glad that you recognise that value from Anything But Footy. So, Drew Barrand, CEO of Aquatics GB, thank you very much for speaking to Great British Bosses from Anything But Footy.
Nice to be here. Thanks, guys.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.